Hello, I'm Christian Dunn, Managing Partner of Strategic Institute for Innovation and Government Contracting. I'm sitting down today with Rick Dunn, founder of Strategic Institute for Government Contracting. But more importantly for our discussion here today, he was the first General Counsel for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency throughout the 90s, and I think he retired in the early 2000s. He's had a long, distinguished career in government contracts and law. He's served with the Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel, and he worked nearly a decade with NASA, where he learned about these other transactions agreements, which were called Space Act launch agreements, I believe. So he brought that sort of thinking and this contractual ideas, philosophy, if you will, over to DARPA, in which he pioneered other transactions authorities, first at DARPA, and then later at throughout the DoD. So we are talking with the pioneer of other transactions. Now, he and I have been talking offline about SBIR and OTs and why it makes both legal and business sense to use SBIR funding to fund other transactions agreements. Rick, I'm going to hand it over to you. I think you're going to address the legal issue first, correct?
Yeah, thank you, Christian, for that introduction. Yeah, the correct award instrument for R&D, I'm going to start off more broadly than just SBIR, because there's an issue here across DoD and many other government agencies about what type of award instrument, what type of contractual instrument to use in research and development. And there's a lack of consistency throughout government. So DoD, the main award instrument for R&D, including the SBIR program, is a procurement contract. And under the Armed Services Procurement Contract, the purpose of a procurement contract, its applicability is to the procurement of all property other than land and all services for which payment is to be made from appropriated funds. So the acquisition of supplies and services is the purpose of a procurement contract. Under the Federal Acquisition Regulation, that is the implementation of the Armed Services Procurement Act and the Federal Property and Administrative Services Act, are these policies. The primary purpose of contracted research and development programs is not the acquisition of supplies and services. Rather, it is to advance scientific and technical knowledge and apply that knowledge to agency and national goals. And Federal Acquisition Regulation Section 35002 points out that R&D contracts are unlike contracts for supplies and services. And the policy statement in 35003 says contracts, and that means procurement contracts, shall be used only when the principal purpose is the acquisition of supplies and services. So there's a disconnect generally. And it's even more profound in the context of the SBIR program, because SBIR program is about aiding small businesses to gain access to federally funded R&D so that they can promote their business, so that they can commercialize products, so that they can create jobs for the economic and national security benefit of our country. And here we have displayed the requirements for participating in the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And you can see, I mean, the small business for SBIR is defined as a business with 500 or fewer employees. And you see some of the other criteria. It's to be a US-based business, and it's a business organized for profit. The SBIR program is a three-phase program. Phase one is sort of a concept development and demonstration phase. Phase two furthers that development. Both of those phases are funded with SBIR funds. And then there's a phase three, which is product development or product deployment, which is funded other than with SBIR funds. It might be funded with private investment, purchase of products, or it could be a government contract. So that's the general idea behind the SBIR program. So with respect to other transactions, we have 10 U.S.C. 2371, which is the basic other transactions authority, and it says that the Secretary of Defense and the military departments may use this authority to carry out basic applied and advanced research projects. Well, basic applied and advanced research is the kind of thing that goes on in the SBIR program. In the SBIR program, there's a definition of funding agreement, which is a term that's used in that program. A funding agreement is a contract, grant, or cooperative agreement. And some folks might say, well, an OT is not a funding agreement. However, for DoD's purposes, and possibly for other government agencies, the authority for OTs is in addition to any authority to use contracts, cooperative agreements, or grants. So DoD has express authority to use other transactions under 2371. And now let's take a look at 2371B. The authority there is 2371B is under the authority of 2371. So it shares that same characteristic, that it's in addition to any authority to carry out research projects by procurement contract, grant agreement, or cooperative agreement. And the scope of prototype authority under 2371 is extremely broad. It's to enhance the mission effectiveness of military personnel, their supporting platforms, systems, components, or materials proposed to be acquired or developed, or improvements. So these authorities are very broad in the area of research and development prototype projects. And in the case of 2371B, there's also a proviso for a streamlined way to move directly into follow-on production. So I mentioned that the SBIR program is a three-phase program, and it almost seems to be a perfect fit for other transactions, where you could enter into an other transaction agreement that in phase one of an SBIR award, which contemplates that phase one, that concept development or that early end research and development, and says, if successful, we will fund a phase two. And phase two would be the further development, the prototype project. And if successful, there's the potential for follow-on purchases or follow-on production. This could be done under a single agreement invoking 2371 or 2371B as phase one, 2371B as phase two, and subsection F of 2371B for follow-on production. And it would be a very simple way just to infuse funding at each successful down select as the phases proceeded. We have on our Strategic Institute website an article entitled Using SBIR Funding as an Other Transactions to Fund an Other Transaction Award Instrument, and also another article which is about 3 years old, or more than 3 years old, published in the distinguished journal, The Government Contractor, about appropriate contractual instruments for research and development.
Terrific article.
So with respect to 2371, you know, some folks might say, well, if you use 2371 as the award instrument, wouldn't you also have to apply the Technology Investment Agreement regulations? And the answer to that is no, you wouldn't, because the TIA regulations apply only to assistance. And today, in the SBIR program, DoD is using procurement contracts, not an assistance instrument. So the policy decision has already been made. So 2371 would be a good instrument to use for a phase one SBIR. Wouldn't you have to have cost sharing? No, cost sharing is not an absolute requirement of 2371. And why would you impose cost sharing on a small business it needs government help to develop its commercial products. So the phase one of this three-phase agreement that I'm talking about could cite the authority of either 2371 or 2371B. And the phase two would be 2371B, and phase three, I mentioned, would be the follow-on production authority. Now, the other reason why other transactions make a lot of sense, in addition to being legally permitted, why they make a lot of business sense for the SBIR program is because we want these companies not to be burdened with all of the overhead of a typical government procurement contract.
Right.
We want them to be flexible, commercial companies. We don't want to make them into little government contractors. Another misunderstanding, another policy that is seldom applied in DoD contracting is actually found in our Title 10 of the United States Code, 10 U.S.C. 2501. 2501B says this: civil military integration policy. The Secretary of Defense shall ensure that the United States attains the national technology and industrial base objectives set forth in subsection A through acquisition policy reforms that have the following objectives. 1, relying to the maximum extent practical upon the commercial national technology and industrial base that is required to meet national security needs of the United States. 2, reducing the reliance of the Department of Defense on technology and industrial base sectors that are economically dependent on the Department of Defense business. And 3, reducing federal government barriers to the use of commercial products, processes, standards. And that policy is more honored in the breach than it is in the observance. And it fits right in with the philosophy of the SBIR program. We don't want to make these companies into little defense contractors dependent on the Department of Defense. And if the defense appropriations go down, their livelihood will be taken away and they'll go out of business. That's not what we want for SBIR companies. We want their engagement with the government to help make them strong companies and graduate from the small business character. So, I mean, I think we've discussed a number of issues. I don't want to get down into the weeds too much, but I think the case for it's legal to do this and it makes business sense to do it is pretty clear.
I'm no government expert, but as soon as I sort of conceptualized and understood that you can use SBIR funding, you can approach some of it as venture capital funding to and really create robust collaborative relationships, which OTs allow. I mean, it's the flexibility that we're talking about. It's the down the road flexibility. You don't know what's going to happen necessarily with this early stage technology. So why not keep it open? Why not keep it flexible? Why not allow for it to maybe more easily integrate? Who knows? But the flexibilities that OTs afford and the congruency of the mission between the SBIR program and what OTs do and allow and what they're actually designed to do, unlike the FAR, which, as you point out, is a purchasing system, trying to shoehorn R&D and prototyping into a purchasing system, a sort of buying stuff mentality, which philosophically seems to infect everybody within the sort of contracting regime. And really, we need to be thinking more about facilitating. And that's really where I think OTs are important. And that's where I think SBIR and OTs really come together, in that they are trying to facilitate this science and technology development. One way is just way more streamlined and can get, capability out to the field quicker if so desired.
The virtue of this, I think, is with respect to the workforce. If DoD adopted a policy of using other transactions in the SBIR program, it would be perforce have to educate and train the program managers, the contracting folks that were involved, and it would end up with a cadre of people that knew about the flexibility of other transactions, knew how they could be used, and how to interact with business in a business sense way.
And this brings up a very important point. And I had a comment this week on a LinkedIn post, and it was somebody, a retired person from Picatinny, New Jersey. And he mentioned, one of the reasons why we can't do this type of stuff, or that we have trouble doing this type of stuff, is we just don't have the workforce that is able to do this. you know, we're into education and training. We want to be a resource, and we want to help. So if we can, I will get some links in the description to Rick's bio and a couple of the articles mentioned, and you will also be able to find our contact and website information in the description below. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing the rest of you sometime soon.